My name is Robert Wallace. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. For those of you who have just joined us, which is a fairly small number I think, welcome. And also for those of you, many of which have travelled a long way. Many have come from the northwest coast, from the north, to this event. And that's testament to the quality, I believe, of our previous speaker, Craig James, and also, of course, to hear firsthand from our Treasurer, Premier Treasurer. I said at this morning's session that I would just keep the official welcome until this session. So I'll just quickly now whip through those, it says here, dignitaries attending. You're all dignitaries, of course, and I'm sure you're all very dignified. But we'll judge that after question time, perhaps. Firstly, the Honourable Lara Giddings, thank you very much for the time and by your presence here today, the day after the announcement of your mid-year report, to show the importance that you do place on connecting with this community. There's 285 people here today, and again, you voted with your feet to come and listen to what the Premier Treasurer is about to tell us, and to have hopefully some good question time afterwards. The Honourable David O'Byrne, the Honourable Scott, Minister for too many things, but basically, sorry, don't take it that wrong way, of course. I think David's the Minister of 5 things, and it's not 5 too many, how's that? But particularly in this case, it's the Minister for Department of Economic Development, Tourism and the Arts, the Minister for Dire, and of course the Workplace Minister, which are all impacting on business at the moment. The Honourable Scott Bacon, who's the Minister for Tourism. The Honourable Tim Morris from the Greens, thank you very much for coming along, Tim, and the Honourable Craig Farrell. Elise Archer, MP, thank you for coming and representing your constituents. The Lord Mayor of Hobart, Alderman Damon Thomas, who of course up until 3 years ago would have been standing here for many years as the CEO of the TCCI. And Damon, I think this is the first chance we've had it, but to publicly congratulate you on your election to the Lord Mayorship. Also, Mayor Graham Berry from Kingston. And I haven't seen Doug Chipman, but Mayor Doug Chipman as well is here. Yep. Welcome also. Thanks, Doug, down there. And also to the TCCI board. We were thinking of spreading them across the room, but we thought, now, if we put them in a cluster, you could actually identify them, and you'll be able to see whether they're nodding their head or going like this. So, welcome along. So it now gives me, without any further ado, the pleasure to introduce Troy Harper, who's our chairman, to actually make the introduction to the Premier Treasurer. So please welcome Troy Harper.
It is with my pleasure I welcome TCCI members and guests to our TCCI Business Leaders Luncheon update. As Robert's mentioned before, please continue to enjoy your lunch during this part of the presentation. Obviously we'll be speaking, but please obviously keep eating. I'd like to take the opportunity now to thank our sponsors, the Commonwealth Bank and Mr Jason Kambowski, for their support. I'd also like to thank Mr Craig James for his presentation and making his time available today. I think it's been one of the certainly most interesting presentations we've had, and it's certainly the first step in putting pay to the fact that economists are quiet, retiring people. So thank you, Craig, for that. We're fortunate again to have the Premier and Treasurer, the Honourable Lara Giddings, MHA, with us today to present the mid-year report in person. I had an opportunity to review the numbers in the mid-year report last night, and I need to be honest, Premier, the numbers are troubling. From my reading of the reports, I noted the following areas of concern. We have a shortfall in the net operating balance of $246 million this year, an increase of $142 million over projections. Employee expenses and superannuation still account for some $2.26 billion, an amount of 46% of total government expenditure. There are a few measures in there that indicate, I think, what those in the private sector are feeling, but I think one of the interesting figures was particularly worrying for the economy was the fall in receipts from taxation on financial and capital transactions of 26.6 million, or a 16% fall in stamp duty. This is a transactional tax, and it represents a clear indication of the fall of the number of capital and financial purchases and sales in the state this year. So that's properties, commercial properties, motor vehicles, those sorts of things. That isn't that indicates, I think, how tough the business community is doing it. The net operating balance over the next 4 years is projected to be a shortfall of some 428 million, or if adjusted for one-off federal government funding, an underlying shortfall of 765 million over the next 4 years. And we had also too, the government's unfunded superannuation liability to its employees has now reached $5.1 billion. We note also too that we're having shortfalls. Government borrowings are projected to be 253 million by the 30th of June 2012. These numbers, let's be clear, I think represent the most difficult challenge to the state's finances in recent history. And I'm talking to the business people here. There should not be one single Tasmanian who thinks that these numbers are not going to materially impact their job or their way of life over the next 4 years. We are not all in isolation on this. We all need to pull together to try and solve these sorts of shortfalls. Premier, it's imperative that further strong, decisive action is taken to rein in the budget, not just for the people in this room, but I think for the people who aren't here, the Tasmanians aged 6 to 18 who are presently at school and would like to stay here and have a future in this state. Premier, we applaud your efforts today. We genuinely mean that. And I'd like to formally welcome you to share with us your plans for the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for that warm welcome. I too would like to begin by acknowledging my parliamentary colleagues who are here, the Minister for Economic Development and Infrastructure, David O'Byrne, the Minister for Tourism, Scott Bacon, the Liberal Member for Denison, Elise Archer, the Member for the Upper House for the seat of Derwent, Craig Farrell, and the Member for Lyons, Mr Tim Morris as well. And a very special thank you also to the Commonwealth Bank for sponsoring this event today. We very much appreciate your support. So thank you too to the TCCI for organising this event. It's a great opportunity for me to be able to walk you through where we're at in terms of the budget for this financial year through the mid-year financial report. Now, last year's report showed our revenues were crashing, and in response we announced the first elements of major savings measures, which eventually added up to $1.4 billion over 4 years. We have made the strong decisions required, and we've set the course to put the state budget onto a sustainable position. We still face challenges, but thanks to the measures that we've already put in place, they are not of the same magnitude as those I spoke about this time last year. Today is an opportunity to provide the business community with an update on Tasmania's budget and economic position as detailed in the 2011-12 mid-year financial report, which I released yesterday. Accompanying the release of this report was the second of a quarterly series of reports which outline progress towards achieving the budget savings targets. And I stress again that this today is just an update, as opposed to what did occur last year with the release of the mid-year financial report, which in effect ended up being a mini-budget. The bottom line results are not significantly influenced by policy decisions and have largely come about due to changes in our budget operating environment. Issues of policy will be addressed as we lead up to the 2012-13 budget, to be released in May, and it's highly likely that the figures that you'll see today will be recast. However, what will not change is our underlying fiscal strategy to restore Tasmania's finances and our determination to keep Tasmania out of net debt. As the report shows, since the 2011-12 budget, Tasmania's financial position and outlook has continued to deteriorate. The major cause of this deterioration has been the continued write-down of GST and state taxation receipts from $1.5 billion last year to a total of $1.9 billion today. This is a situation that continues to impact all states as the nation deals with the aftermath of the global financial downturn. On the expenditure side, the report shows that the government is making strong progress towards its overall savings target of $290 million for 2011-12, as part of the $1.4 billion reduction in spending over the forward estimates. However, there is an acknowledgement that some departments, particularly health, are experiencing difficulty meeting budget allocations, including their respective savings target. This is largely a reflection of the difficulty in identifying and implementing specific savings initiatives, which has meant that some timelines have needed to be adjusted. These are not always easy savings to achieve, and in many cases they directly affect members of the community. And in health, for example, we need to be careful and considered to minimise the impact on patient care. At this point, the effect of these savings shortfalls has still been relatively minor, with $27 million of savings not achieved, while the remainder of the $1.4 billion is remaining on track. The mid-year report essentially strengthens the need for the government to continue with its responsible fiscal strategy, and that is precisely what we will do. As people in this room would understand, without the strong action the government is taking, Tasmania's financial position would be much worse. What we can't afford to occur is for a failed budget position to spill out across the Tasmanian economy and spiral out of control, as is occurring across parts of continental Europe today. The government's response to this economic imperative was set in the last budget. The key objectives of the government's response are to return the state's financial position to a long-term sustainable position, improve the efficiency and effectiveness of government services, and infrastructure investment to support productivity improvement and long-term economic growth. The response is made up of several components, with a savings target across the next 4 years of that $1.4 billion that I've mentioned. To maximise transparency on progress towards achieving this target, the government committed to publishing quarterly reports detailing the progress across all of our government departments. Our second quarterly report was released yesterday and shows that strong progress is being made across government to bring the size of the public sector back to a sustainable position. In the 6 months since the release of the budget, a reduction in headcount of over 800 full-time equivalents has been achieved without the need for forced redundancies. Importantly, we are achieving real structural change, which means that the savings we reach will continue to be realised across the forward estimates. This slide highlights the key financial movements that have occurred since the publication of the budget. On the revenue side, we have continued to be affected by the downturn in GST receipts, with a further write-down of $23 million per annum on average. This is a consequence of lower household consumption and subdued dwelling investment across Australia. For similar reasons, our tax receipts have also declined by $25 million per year on average. The biggest cause of this decline is lower than expected activity in the property market, leading to the decline in stamp duties, which Troy mentioned. However, on the positive side, payroll tax receipts have been revised up by close to $10 million a year, which is a reflection of the resilience of our labour market. It also shows that businesses are investing and creating jobs. They are valuing and retaining the skills of their staff, even though times are tough. However, some in our community still find it difficult to accept that the world has changed and refuse to acknowledge the devastating impact that this has put on our financial position. Tasmania has now lost $1.9 billion in GST and state revenue since the start of the global financial crisis. We have no responsible choice other than to reduce government spending in response. Returns from our state-owned companies have also declined, particularly Aurora Energy and also the Motor Accident Insurance Board, which is heavily exposed to the volatility in financial markets. On the expenditure side, I have noted that due to the long lead time for the Department of Health and Human Services to realise its $100 million worth of savings, the report shows it's currently $25 million short of being on budget in this financial year. But let me stress, this should not be seen as new money into health. Rather, it is once-off funding for this year only to cover the shortfall that the agency could not achieve in the first part of the year. It is vital that our health system reduces costs and operates more efficiently, particularly in light of the fact that we will see national health reform starting on the 1st of July this year. Achieving the full savings required in 2011-12 would mean deeper and faster cuts than we have already made to our health system, with greater impacts on services delivered for patients. And I do not believe that this is justified simply to meet the arbitrary deadline of the end of this financial year. But I remain absolutely committed to health having to achieve the $100 million saving target that has been set for them, and they will achieve that target. Other expenditure challenges relate to the Tasmanian Prison Service, as well as the Tasmanian Government's $15 million contribution to the Forest Industry Agreement. This table provides a summary of the revised headline figures, which shows deterioration on the net operating balance. This is not unique to Tasmania. Across all states except Victoria, the 2012-13 net operating balance projections have worsened. While the deterioration of the operating balance is notable, on an underlying basis, the government remains on track, with this deficit measure reducing from $387 million in the current year to $96 million in 2014-15. The fiscal balance, which adds in capital expenditure, is also showing a trend in the right direction. But most importantly, the state remains net debt-free. In fact, our near-term position has strengthened, which partly reflects proceeds from the $103 million tote sale. I note that today's media coverage of the expected delay in our return to surplus, and I want to make it clear that we remain determined to return to surplus as soon as possible. We have not abandoned our fiscal target. It needs to be remembered that yesterday's report is just an update on our current position, and this year's budget will give us the opportunity to review progress on our fiscal strategy of returning the budget to surplus as soon as we can. It should also be noted that despite the politics being played around the headline deficit figure of $246 million, valid comparisons with previous years are problematic because the current accrual accounting regime is less than a decade old. So if you want to compare apples with apples, the only figure you can reasonably consider is a consolidated fund deficit. By that measure, the revised consolidated fund deficit of $116 million represents 2.6% of total consolidated fund budget expenditure of $4.7 billion. That is nowhere near the 7% consolidated fund deficit that we saw in the early 1990s, when the deficit was over $120 million in a $1.7 billion budget, at a time when also the state was struggling with a large net debt problem. The risks of taking Tasmania back into the red would be well understood by most of you in this room. As the Chamber's CEO Robert Wallace himself noted yesterday, budget savings are already putting pressure on the health and education system. But if the savings are not made now, there will be greater crisis later as we add debt servicing costs into the mix. This chart shows that if we had not adopted the strategy taken in the last budget, our debt position would be rapidly spiralling out of control to a situation even worse than the 1990s. Instead, as the green line depicts, we have managed to arrest the growth in our financial liabilities over the forward estimates so we can start to rebuild our savings and have the confidence to withstand future shocks. In fact, we continue to feel the aftershocks of the most recent economic crisis. Rather than dissipating, the global economic outlook continues to become increasingly uncertain, with many advanced economies recording low growth and facing weak near-term economic prospects. In particular, there are sovereign debt issues in Europe, and concerns over the stability of the Eurozone banking system exist. And despite some recent employment positives, the US economy remains sluggish and is yet to recover from the economic downturn experienced in late 2008. The most recent economic updates from institutions such as the IMF, World Bank and OECD have all revised down world growth forecasts. The weaker growth outlook is also reflected in the Commonwealth Treasury's forecasts for growth in Australia's economy. The upside, and I know you have heard a lot about the upside too from Craig this morning, and I understand it was a fantastic presentation he provided, is that which exists in the Asian economies, with the notable exception of Japan. The Asian economies continue to hold relatively firm, buoyed by continued strong domestic demand, and this is where Tasmania's opportunity lies. We are still only 500,000 people located in a region that is home to 60% of the world's population, which will increasingly demand the products that we are capable of supplying and will be seeking safe locations to invest their capital. A prime example of this is the demand for our dry milk powder, which is driving some of the recent dairy investments that we're seeing in the northwest. As the earlier presentation would have noted, the Australian economy continues to show a major disparity between state economies based on mineral resources. As Australia has been strongly reliant on the resources sector to emerge from the economic downturn in activity that occurred in late 2008, new problems have arisen for many of the non-resource sectors of the economy. In particular, the strong demand for Australia's commodities has driven up the value of the Australian dollar. And you can see evidence of this two-track economy in this final demand chart. Final demand is an indicator of economic activity, although it does exclude exports. Following the GFC, we can see the large gap emerge in final demand for non-resource-rich jurisdictions compared to resource-rich jurisdictions like Western Australia. This chart shows that the two-track economy is now flowing through to employment growth. The non-resource-rich jurisdictions are experiencing relatively flat labour markets, while the resource-rich jurisdictions continue to record employment growth. It is now clear that the resource-rich jurisdictions are successfully attracting labour as well as capital. That is why a slightly lower population growth is forecast in our mid-year financial report. While the drivers of the national economy are contributing to a difficult economic environment for Tasmania, we are still seeing the state economy holding up well according to a variety of indicators. The most recent National Accounts release provides some insight into the recent performance of the Tasmanian economy. The chart on the left shows that in the September quarter 2011, we saw further growth in consumption and a drop in public investment as the Australian government's economic stimulus package winds down. Importantly, the largest contributor to growth in final demand in the September quarter 2011 was business investment. The chart on the right sums up the situation quite well. As you can see in the blue line, private investment in Tasmania has turned the corner. We are seeing business confidence returning and investment rising. Importantly, the most significant investment growth has been in machinery and equipment, which has been up more than 30% over the year. This is a sign that businesses are investing for the recovery and will be more productive in the future as they modernise their technology and their business processes. Tasmania has now had 6 consecutive quarters of positive growth in private investment, including over $4.3 billion in the past year. State Treasury has now revised up its outlook for private investment since the 2011-12 budget, backed up by the progression of some large projects, such as the $400 million Muscle Row wind farm, dairy and other irrigation-related investment across the state. If we look at Tasmania's export performance, we see a similar story, albeit not quite as robust. Exports continue to hold up reasonably well, but at a much lower level compared to around 2 years ago. The chart on the right explains why. The value of the Australian dollar continues to hover well above parity against the US dollar. Bear in mind that less than 10 years ago, the Australian dollar was trading at less than 50 US cents, and just 2 years ago, the Australian dollar was trading at around 65 US cents. And when you consider the extraordinary appreciation of the Australian currency since then, Tasmanian export levels have actually been quite resilient. This higher exchange rate, along with greater household savings levels, has had profound effects across Tasmania's various industry sectors. In the last financial year, Tasmania recorded positive growth in gross state product, but recorded notable declines in manufacturing, retail trade and accommodation services. Yet more than 2/3 of the industry sectors recorded by the ABS displayed positive growth. That is why the need for economic diversification in Tasmania is critical. We know that many traditional sectors will continue to come under pressure, so we need to reduce our heavy reliance on these areas alone. The diversification of Tasmania's economy is one of the major goals of our economic development plan. In spite of the challenging environment Tasmania finds itself in, the state's labour market is holding up by historical standards. While Tasmanian employment fell during the global downturn, it began recovering at the end of 2009. Employment has not yet reached pre-downturn levels. However, we are seeing some positive signs, although today's unemployment figures show some immediate deterioration. This re-emphasises the importance of the government's focus on jobs growth as its key priority. Treasury's revised forecasts note that despite some positive signs in the first half of this financial year, external downside risks have also increased, particularly due to the risk of the fallout from the Eurozone economies that could yet lead the world economy into a deep recession, which we hope it, of course, doesn't. And I understand Craig might have been a little more positive in his presentation. Accordingly, growth forecasts for 2011-12 are marginally down since the time of the 2011-12 budget. These forecasts are consistent with the Australian Treasury's revised outlook on the national economy. So far, I've provided an update on the revised budget and economic forecasts outlined in the mid-year report. And as you will have noted, the situation has become even more challenging. Yet in these sorts of challenging times, which provide the necessary platform for reform, innovation and investment that will set up our economy to provide new jobs and a positive future for the next generation. If we can lift ourselves up and think beyond the moment, Tasmania does stand poised to benefit from its great natural advantages. We are in the right place of the world at the right time with all the ingredients for success. I've been in the job for a little over a year now, and I'm constantly asked, do you enjoy it? How do you find it? And I always say, yes, I love it. I'm sure it's a tough job, but it's a privilege to hold it. And it's a challenge that makes it all the more interesting. And it's a challenge each of us have to follow through, confront and create strong achievements. And I'm already seeing the signs that the pathway towards Tasmania's positive future. Just last week, I was in the far northwest with Federal Regional Development Minister Simon Crean. Here was a community that only 18 months ago was facing total devastation and had been almost written off. But today, through the hard work and vision of the local community in towns like Smithton, they have a bright future. The Labor government was able to support this future by investing in new skills and infrastructure. Smithton will now have a first-class agricultural trade school and will provide the opportunity for 27 farms to convert from low-value beef to higher-value dairy production. But don't take my word for it alone. Ask the local mayor, Mayor Darryl Quillam, who said, and I quote, "This has the potential to redefine our future as a region, and we see the investment from the Australian and Tasmanian government as a hand up rather than a hand out." That same day, we visited with the Minister for Economic Development, David O'Byrne, the Huon region to invest in vital infrastructure for our aquaculture industry. And once again, don't take my word for it, listen to the words of Peter Bender from Huon Aquaculture, who said, "It is of great importance that a region such as ours, that is struggling with the restructure of the forest industry, is able to reinvent itself with new industries, such as the salmon industry, that have the potential to keep growing and provide jobs into the future." And of course, the largest investment in Tasmania's history has been given new life. Successive Labor governments have supported the pulp mill, and I am hopeful that last week's welcome announcement of a major investment in guns by New Zealand's billionaire Richard Chandler will bring that project even a step closer. But we are much more than just the one-trick pony. Tasmania has other great strengths backed up by the investment in the national broadband network, a full 5 years ahead of the rest of the nation. The $220 million that we're investing in new irrigation projects to capitalise on our abundance of water and create investment in high-quality agricultural production. And our investment in first-class science and research facilities, and our work with the University of Tasmania to help grow the university and wider education sector. And in a world increasingly affected by climate change and overcrowding, we mustn't overlook our livability advantage. That is why the government's ongoing investment in the arts, in culture and sport are also important. We now have international events across all sporting codes coming to Tasmania and promoting our brand across Australia. So it's with these great strengths that I stand here and proudly say that Tasmania is indeed open for business. My government is working with business to continue to create jobs, not only for today, but for our children tomorrow. We can give young Tasmanians a reason to stay in this state and not think that they have to leave to seek a better life elsewhere. Our mid-year financial report shows that further jobs growth is coming, with Treasury predicting that almost 2,000 additional jobs are expected through the year to June 2012. Governments can and must create the conditions for business to succeed, but there is only so much that governments can do. At the end of the day, it is only business and investors that can take us the next step towards a better economic future. And I urge you, the business community of Tasmania, to keep the faith in Tasmania's future, to invest in our state and to create the jobs that will benefit future generations as well as our own. My government is determined to keep making the strong decisions needed to position our state for a better future, and I urge you as leaders of our business community to continue to play a key role in leading us there. Thank you.